Why did I feel nothing when my mother, who called me overdramatic, collapsed in court? At 9:12 a.m., the judge looked up from the sealed file. As his gaze swept across the courtroom, I, senior analyst Phoebe Jensen, plunged the entire space into dead silence with my wordless aura. The triumphant smile froze on my stepbrother Mark's face, as if trapped in ice. My mother Sandra's hand, mid-reach for the utensils, hung suspended in the air, her fingertips still tinged with the pretense of kindness. Those who had spent years calling me overdramatic and overthinking, now stared wide-eyed, their throats clamped as if stuffed with lead, too afraid to even breathe loudly. They thought this was just another family farce to brush off, never guessing it was a federal chess game long in the making, evidence like sharp blades, severing all possibility of their lies. To the outside world, we were the textbook perfect family, white picket fences enclosing neatly trimmed hedges, smarmy grins on Christmas cards that dazzled the eye. My mother Sandra had devoted her life to maintaining this false respectability. She believed peace meant sweeping problems under the rug, silence was the glue holding family together, and appearances were far more valuable than truth. My stepfather Gary was happy to go along for the ride, while my stepbrother Mark, her cherished golden boy, was the brightest star in this charade of lies. Her favoritism had seeped into every crevice of life, like tiny needles pricking every moment of my growth. For Mark's birthday, she'd plan a grand feast 2 weeks in advance, order a 3-tiered cream cake, and let him and his friends party until midnight, filling the living room with endless laughter. For mine, nothing but a perfunctory, happy birthday, often forgotten amid her work and Mark's trivial matters. One year, I saved up 3 months' allowance to buy a professional book I'd longed for, only for my mother to say in front of relatives, "What a waste of money. This would be better spent on a pair of sneakers for Mark." Another time, I had a high fever of 102 degrees Fahrenheit 39 degrees Celsius, burning up as I begged her to take me to the hospital. But she was too busy packing Mark's luggage for a business trip, not even looking up as she said, "Just take some fever medicine. Stop making a fuss and delaying Mark's trip." Yet later, when Mark had a mere cough, she frantically called a family doctor, simmered rock sugar pear soup for 3 days, and stayed by his side every minute, doting on him endlessly. Family dinners were always Mark's one-man show. My mother would suddenly raise her voice, "Mark got a promotion again." The applause rang out like a royal coronation, her eyes glowing brighter than candle flames. Mark would raise his glass with a conceited smile, "Assistant sales manager." Everyone at the table would chime in, while I stared down at my chicken, a transparent shadow in my own home. When I mentioned passing the federal certification, earned by only 3% of analysts nationwide, Gary's gaze remained glued to Mark as he patted my hand perfunctorily, "That's nice. Stick to your little government job, it's stable." That word, stable, cut like a dull knife. They would never understand the agony of staring at encrypted codes in soundproof rooms until dawn, the weight of holding life-or-death intelligence, or that what I sought was never mediocre stability, but recognition of my professional worth. As the extra child, I'd long mastered the survival rule of silence, shrink myself to dust, force a smile when necessary, and swallow the truth to maintain the family's peace. My mother always said, "Phoebe, you're overthinking," but what she wanted wasn't my happiness, just that I wouldn't become an accident disrupting her perfect life. Every holiday was a repeat of the absurd drama. If Mark showed up 2 hours late drunk, my mother would greet him with joy, take his coat, reheat his food, and murmur, "You must be exhausted." But if I was 10 minutes late from work, I'd be met with her disappointed sighs and cold accusations, "Punctuality is a virtue. Why can't you ever learn? You're such a handful." This double standard wrapped around my neck like vines, suffocating me. They had never truly seen me. I was just background noise, the always reliable, never needy, good daughter. They mistook my tolerance for obedience, my silence for weakness, never realizing that peace without truth is never redemption, but a cage for the soul. The straw that broke the camel's back was a summer barbecue a year ago. Mark was boasting to Gary about closing a big deal, while my mother laughed loudly and kept piling food on his plate. I mustered the courage to share how my team had foiled an overseas terrorist attack. But before I could finish, my mother waved her hand impatiently, Phoebe, you always exaggerate everything. Can't you say something people actually want to hear? That word, exaggerate, stuck in my heart like a rusty wooden splinter. Late at night, I sat alone on the porch, holding a cold cup of black coffee as I stared into the dark yard. Fireflies flickered faintly, and the humid air smelled of grass and soil, yet it weighed heavily on my chest. Suddenly, I realized, in my world, precision and silence were weapons that saved lives, but in this family, silence was just a breeding ground for lies. At that moment, the softness in my heart turned to steel. I knew the next time I heard exaggerate, I would not stay silent. The incident happened on a sweltering night, the air thick with the acrid stench of whiskey, crickets chirping restlessly, as if foreshadowing an impending storm. At 4:40 a.m., the sound of shattering glass pierced the silence, followed by Mark's slurred, violent insults. When I rushed into the kitchen, he was drunk out of his mind, his shirt soaked with sweat, collar askew. His once decent face was twisted with intoxication, his eyes bloodshot like a rabid beast. The refrigerator's cold light outlined his ferocious silhouette as he clutched a broken beer bottle, shards glinting dangerously in the light. Shattered utensils littered the floor, mixed with pools of unmopped beer. Can't sleep. Our little secret agent still thinking about saving the world. He sneered maliciously, his words laced with ice that sent chills down my spine. I forced down my unease, keeping my voice as steady as possible. Mark, you're drunk. You should go to bed. That was my first mistake. My calmness felt like a direct provocation to him. He lunged forward, the broken beer bottle almost pressing against my chest, his breath reeking of alcohol and sweat, nauseating me. You think that lousy job makes you special? He roared, spittle flying onto my face. Mom's right, you hide behind cold codes because no one could ever truly care about you. You're a useless freak who never should have been in this family. Those venomous words were the truth my mother had hidden behind her gentle facade. What shattered me even more was the faint sound of my parents snickering from the living room. They hadn't been asleep. They'd been listening to their golden boy humiliate me, and they thought the whole thing was funny. I couldn't take it any more. I turned to grab a towel to wipe up the glass, desperate to escape that suffocating space. But as I bent down, I heard the sharp sound of a drawer being wrenched open. When I turned, Mark was holding a Phillips screwdriver, its metal tip glinting menacingly in the cold light. The malice in his eyes was as thick as ink, freezing my blood. Mark, stop. Put that down. My voice trembled uncontrollably, yet still held a flicker of resolve. He laughed maniacally, a sound as shrill as nails on a chalkboard. See? There you go again, exaggerating. Today I'll teach you your place. Before I could react, he pounced, his strength overwhelming me. The screwdriver's tip plunged deep into my right shoulder. Agony exploded instantly, like a flame burning through my flesh, spreading relentlessly. My vision blurred as I tried to struggle, but he pinned me down hard on the floor, his other hand squeezing my neck tighter and tighter, cutting off my breath. Warm blood gushed from my shoulder, soaking my shirt and pooling into a dark red stain on the cold floor. I could feel my life slipping away, my sight dimming, as I gasped for air and Mark roared like a beast. He even slammed his knee into my abdomen repeatedly, muttering, "Who do you think you are, showing off? Thinking you're better than me? I'll kill you, freak." Above the excruciating pain and mortal fear, my mother's voice cut through the chaos, brimming with unmasked irritation. "Phoebe, stop exaggerating. Can't you just be considerate for once?" In that moment of extreme pain and despair, something inside me snapped completely. Lying on the cold floor, feeling the warmth of my blood draining away, I suddenly realized there was one last thing I could control: what I did next. With my final ounce of strength, my fingers groped for my phone lying nearby, and by muscle memory, I pressed the emergency call button. When I opened my eyes again, the world was a blinding white. The smell of disinfectant filled my nose, and the steady beep of the heart monitor hammered in my ears. The pain in my right shoulder shot through every breath, even the slightest movement sent spasms of agony through my body. The doctor said the screwdriver had penetrated deeply, damaging my scapula and surrounding nerves. Surgery was necessary, followed by long-term rehabilitation, and there was no guarantee of full recovery. Through my haze, I heard my mother's forced, stiffly gentle voice, "Thank goodness you're awake. You were so clumsy, getting up for water in the middle of the night and tripping over the toolbox. Mark's been so guilty he cried all night, and didn't eat a thing." I tripped. I stared into her eyes, my voice hoarse and broken. Her cold light flooded my heart like a tide. She nodded frantically, avoiding my gaze. "Yes, you're always so clumsy when you're tired. It was just an accident, don't dwell on it." That sentence shattered my last shred of hope. The searing pain of the screwdriver, the sticky blood on the floor, Mark's ferocious face, my parents' laughter, all replayed in my mind. Yet she'd brushed it off as an accident. I finally understood, they'd never been protecting me. They'd been protecting their golden boy, and their false family. I forced myself to stay calm, my training as a federal analyst kicked in. "Where's Mark?" "At home, wallowing in guilt." "You should see how hard he's been crying, he's devastated," Gary chimed in, his tone clearly dismissive. I sneered inwardly. The man who'd tried to kill me hours earlier. Crying? "I'm fine. Can I have a minute alone?" My mother's face lit up with relief, as if lifting a heavy burden. "Of course. We'll bring you some clean clothes later." They didn't spare me another glance, didn't even ask about my injuries, before turning and leaving the hospital room. The door clicked shut softly, a period marking the end of my last fantasy about this family. In that moment my tense nerves relaxed, and I let out a slow breath. My hand still trembled from pain and anger, but I reached firmly for the phone on the nightstand. The hospital lights illuminated my pale, haggard face, but my eyes were colder and more determined than ever. I unlocked my phone and opened the encrypted line my family knew nothing about, my final defense as a federal analyst. My fingers moved swiftly across the screen, muscle memory overriding the throbbing in my shoulder. "This is Senior Analyst Phoebe Jensen. Reporting an assault on a federal employee. Request activation of the coercion emergency protocol." There was a brief silence on the line before the operator's calm, professional voice replied, "Confirmed. Coercion code received at 4:05 a.m. Relevant authorities will intervene immediately." There was no relief as I'd expected, only absolute clarity. From that moment on, I made the rules. Hours later, the hospital room door opened. Anna Ray, the agency's legal liaison, stepped in. Dressed in a dark suit, she stood tall and straight, her eyes sharp as an eagle's, exuding competence and professionalism. "You did the right thing," she said, placing a folder on the nightstand. "Your emergency call triggered an automatic health check. Medical reports, crime scene investigation records, weapon forensics, all documented. We don't need emotional accusations. The evidence will speak for itself. They think this is just family business, something they can sweep under the rug like always," I said calmly, my heart already numb. Anna smiled coldly. "Then we'll teach them this, the safety of a federal employee is never a private matter." As she left, I caught my reflection in the window, a figure with a heavily bandaged shoulder, eyes steady and unwavering. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible, disposable daughter, I felt like a blade of truth, sharp and unyielding. On the day of the trial, the courtroom reeked of old paper and coffee, thick with suffocating tension. The wooden benches creaked as people settled in, as if mourning the secrets about to be uncovered. When the bailiff called my name, all murmurs fell silent, and hundreds of eyes turned to me. Dressed in a simple black suit, I held my head high and walked to the plaintiff's table beside Anna, the dull ache in my shoulder a constant reminder of why we were here. In the defendant's box, Mark wore a brand new suit, but it couldn't hide the panic and exhaustion in his eyes. His hair was combed meticulously, yet it failed to conceal his dark circles. The arrogance was gone, replaced by deep fear and remorse. Our eyes met briefly before he darted his gaze away, his hands clenched tightly until his knuckles turned white, his body trembling slightly even as he sat. My mother sat beside him, her face ashen, her usual poise gone, her eyes filled with anxiety and unease. Anna leaned close to me, her voice low. Let him put on his show. We'll wait for the right moment to strike. Mark's lawyer still tried to argue it was an accident stemming from a family dispute, that Mark hadn't acted intentionally. But as soon as he finished, Anna stood up calmly and handed the sealed evidence folder to the judge. When the judge read out the key evidence, fingerprints on the weapon match Mark Jensen exactly, blood alcohol content 0.16 at the time of the incident, shoulder wound consistent with intentional stabbing, Mark's resolve crumbled completely. He jumped to his feet, his voice hoarse and broken. Your Honor, I plead guilty. I was drunk, I was jealous of Phoebe's success, I stabbed her on purpose. I'm so sorry. His confession echoed through the courtroom, filled with endless remorse and despair. He choked up as he stumbled through his words, talking about his long-standing jealousy, how my mother's favoritism had made him spoiled and insecure, about that night's violence and madness. I know I was wrong. I'll accept any punishment, just please, Phoebe, forgive me. He turned to me, his eyes red and streaming, snot mixing with tears. All his pride was gone, replaced by abject begging. Throughout it all, I remained calm and composed. No anger, no resentment, not even a flicker of emotion. All the grievances, pain, and despair of those years faded away as the truth came to light. I spoke slowly, my voice clear and unwavering. Your Honor, I reject any settlement, and I don't need his forgiveness. I only ask that the court deliver justice, and that he pays for his actions. My calm stood in stark contrast to Mark's breakdown, and the courtroom fell silent. The judge nodded, his gaze sweeping across the room as he said sternly, based on the defendant's guilty plea and the overwhelming evidence, this court sentences Mark Jensen to 7 years in prison for aggravated assault. A permanent restraining order is granted to the plaintiff, Phoebe Jensen, prohibiting the defendant from any contact with the plaintiff, including phone calls, text messages, emails, social media, and physical proximity. The bailiff stepped forward, and the cold click of handcuffs locking around Mark's wrists echoed through the room. He didn't resist, just stumbled forward as he was led away. As he passed me, he whispered "I'm sorry" over and over, his voice barely audible. My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing uncontrollably, but no one pitied her. Gary hung his head, his hands clenched into fists, his face livid, whether with anger or shame, I couldn't care less. The judge and his gavel came down with a resounding bang. This case is adjourned. The echo lingered, a testament to the truth, a proclamation of justice, and a clarion call for my freedom from the cage. You did well, Anna said, turning to me with approval in her eyes. I shook my head slightly, my voice as calm as still water. I didn't do anything. I just let the truth speak for itself. Walking out of the courtroom, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting dazzling light on the marble floors. The air was fresh and crisp, moist with the aftermath of rain. Taking a deep breath, I felt as if all the filth and darkness had been washed away. My colleagues waited at the end of the corridor, not crowding around with empty condolences, but watching me with pure respect. Jensen, glad you're okay, Director Evans said, nodding slightly, his tone warm with concern. We'll handle the rest. Focus on your recovery. That unassuming respect meant more to me than any elaborate comfort. It was the recognition I'd fire blazing and spreading beneath my skin. The searing pain blurred my vision. I tried to struggle, but he pinned me firmly to the floor, his other hand clamping down on my neck, cutting off my breath. Warm blood gushed from my shoulder, soaking through my shirt and pooling into a dark crimson stain on the cold tile. I could feel my life slipping away, my sight growing dim as only my ragged gasps and Mark's animalistic snarls filled my ears. He drove his knee repeatedly into my abdomen, muttering through gritted teeth, "Who do you think you are, showing off like that? I'll kill you, you freak." Above the excruciating pain and the terror of impending death, my mother's voice cut through the chaos, brimming with unmasked irritation. "Phoebe, stop being so dramatic. Can't you just behave for once?" In that moment of unbearable agony and despair, something inside me snapped completely. Lying on the cold floor, feeling the warmth of my own blood draining away, I suddenly realized there was one last thing I could control, what I did next. With my final ounce of strength, my fingers fumbled for the phone lying nearby and pressed the emergency call button by muscle memory. When I opened my eyes again, the world was a harsh white. The smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils, and the steady beep of the heart monitor hammered in my ears. Every breath sent a sharp jolt of pain through my right shoulder, even the slightest movement triggered convulsions. The doctor said the screwdriver had penetrated deeply, damaging my scapula and surrounding nerves. Surgery was necessary, followed by long-term rehabilitation, and there was no guarantee of a full recovery. Through the haze of pain, I heard my mother's deliberately soft yet stiff voice, "Thank goodness you're awake. You were so clumsy, getting up for water in the middle of the night and tripping over the toolbox. Mark's been crying himself sick with guilt, he hasn't eaten a thing." I tripped. I stared into her eyes, my voice hoarse and broken. Her cold light crashed over me like a tidal wave. She nodded frantically, avoiding my gaze. "Yes, you're always so clumsy when you're tired. It was just an accident, don't dwell on it." That sentence shattered my last shred of hope. The searing pain of the screwdriver piercing my flesh, the sticky blood on the floor, Mark's feral face, my parents snickering, all replayed in my mind. Yet she dismissed it all as a simple accident. I finally understood, they had never been protecting me. They were protecting their golden boy, safeguarding their false perfect family. I forced myself to stay calm, drawing on my training as a federal analyst. "Where's Mark?" "He's at home, wallowing in guilt. You should see how hard he's crying, he's absolutely devastated," Gary chimed in, his tone dripping with feigned concern. I sneered inwardly. The man who had tried to kill me just hours earlier. Crying? "I'm fine now. Can I have a minute alone?" A look of immense relief crossed my mother's face, as if she'd just shed a heavy burden. "Of course. We'll bring you some clean clothes later." They didn't spare me another glance, didn't ask about my pain or my recovery. They turned and left the hospital room, the door clicking shut softly, a final period marking the end of my last illusion of family. In that moment, the tension in my body drained away, and I let out a slow breath. My hands still trembled from pain and anger, but they moved steadily toward the phone on the nightstand. The hospital lights illuminated my pale, haggard face, but my eyes were colder and more resolute than ever before. I unlocked the phone and opened the encrypted line my family knew nothing about, my last line of defense as a federal analyst. My fingers flew across the screen, muscle memory overriding the throbbing in my shoulder. "This is Senior Analyst Phoebe Jensen. Reporting an assault on a federal employee. Request immediate activation of the coercion emergency protocol." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by the calm, professional voice of the operator, "Confirmation received. Coercion code logged at 4:05 a.m. Relevant agencies are en route to intervene." There was no relief, only absolute clarity. From that moment on, I made the rules. Hours later, the hospital room door opened and Anna Ray, the agency's legal liaison, stepped inside. She wore a dark suit, her posture straight, and her eyes sharp as an eagle's, exuding an aura of efficiency and professionalism. "You did the right thing," she said without preamble, placing a folder on the nightstand. "Your emergency distress signal triggered an automatic health check. Medical reports, crime scene investigation records, and weapon forensics are all on file. We don't need emotional appeals, evidence will speak for itself." "They think this is just a family matter, something they can sweep under the rug like always," I said calmly, my heart already numb to their lies. Anna smiled faintly, a hint of contempt in her eyes. "Then we'll teach them that the safety of a federal employee is never a private matter." As she turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the window, a figure with a heavily bandaged shoulder, eyes steady and unwavering. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter, but a blade of truth, sharp and unyielding. On the day of the trial, the courtroom reeked of old paper and coffee, thick with suffocating tension. The wooden benches creaked as people settled into their seats, as if mourning the secrets about to be exposed. When the bailiff called my name, all murmurs fell silent, and hundreds of eyes turned to me. I wore a simple black suit, my back straight as I followed Anna to the plaintiff's table. The dull ache in my shoulder was a constant reminder of why I was there. In the defendant's seat, Mark wore a brand new suit, but it couldn't hide the panic and exhaustion in his eyes. His hair was neatly combed, yet it failed to cover his dark circles. The arrogance was gone, replaced by deep fear and remorse. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white, his body trembling slightly as he sat. Beside him, my mother's face was ashen, her usual poise shattered, her eyes filled with anxiety and desperation. Anna leaned in, her voice low, "Let him put on his show. We'll strike when the time is right." Mark's lawyer launched into a dramatic defense, claiming it was just a family dispute gone wrong, that Mark had never intended to harm me. But as soon as he finished speaking, Anna stood up calmly and handed the sealed evidence folder to the judge. When the judge read aloud the key findings, fingerprints on the weapon match Mark Jensen's, Mark's blood alcohol content was 0.16 at the time of the incident, well above the legal limit. The shoulder wound is consistent with intentional stabbing. Mark's resolve crumbled completely. He jumped to his feet, his voice hoarse with desperation. "Your Honor, I'm guilty. I was drunk, I was jealous of Phoebe's success, I stabbed her on purpose. I'm so sorry." His confession echoed through the courtroom, filled with overwhelming remorse and despair. He choked up as he stumbled through his story, his lifelong jealousy, how my mother's favoritism had made him spoiled yet insecure, the madness of that night. "I know I was wrong. I'll accept any punishment, just please, Phoebe, forgive me." He looked at me, his eyes red and streaming with tears, all his pride gone, replaced by abject begging. Throughout it all, I remained calm and composed. No anger, no resentment, not even a flicker of emotion. Years of hurt, pain, and despair faded away as the truth was laid bare. I spoke slowly, my voice clear and firm. "Your Honor, I reject any plea deals, and I don't need his forgiveness. I only ask that the court deliver a just verdict, holding him accountable for his actions." My calm stood in stark contrast to Mark's breakdown, and the courtroom fell silent. The judge nodded, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Mark, his tone stern. "Based on the defendant's guilty plea and the overwhelming evidence, this court sentences Mark Jensen to 7 years in prison for aggravated assault. A permanent restraining order is granted against the defendant, prohibiting all contact with the plaintiff, including phone calls, text messages, emails, social media interactions, and physical proximity." The bailiffs moved forward, and the cold click of handcuffs echoed through the room as they clamped around Mark's wrists. He didn't resist, just stared blankly as he was led away. As he passed me, he whispered repeatedly, "I'm sorry," his voice barely audible. My mother collapsed onto her seat, sobbing uncontrollably, but no one pitied her. Gary hung his head, his hands clenched into fists, his face livid with a mix of anger and shame. The judge gathered his papers and brought his gavel down hard. "This case is adjourned." The sound reverberated through the room, an echo of truth, a proclamation of justice, and a battle cry for my freedom. "You did well," Anna said, turning to me, admiration in her eyes. I shook my head slightly, my voice as calm as still water. "I didn't do anything. I just let the truth speak for itself." Walking out of the courtroom, the morning sun broke through the clouds, casting bright light on the marble floors. The air was fresh and crisp, damp with the aftermath of rain. Taking a deep breath, I felt as if all the filth and darkness had been washed away. My colleagues waited at the end of the corridor, not crowding around with empty condolences, but looking at me with pure respect. "Jensen, glad you're okay," Director Evans said, nodding slightly. "We'll handle the follow-up legal proceedings. You've been through enough, take some time to recover." That unselfish respect meant more to me than any grand gesture of sympathy. It was the recognition I had always craved, not the forced tolerance of blood relations, but acceptance earned through skill and integrity. My mother's voice called out from behind, weak and desperate, "Phoebe, wait. Please, can we talk?" I didn't look back, didn't slow down. Some wounds can never heal, some lies can never be unspoken. I walked toward the light, each step steady and purposeful. The ache in my shoulder was now a badge of freedom, a mark of my break from the past. Truth had finally done what I never could, silence the hypocrites, the selfish, and the cruel. Stepping outside the courthouse, the sun warmed my face, gentle, not scorching, like a soft hand brushing away the scars. Anna walked beside me. Mark will undergo mandatory rehabilitation in prison. 7 years is enough time for him to reflect on his actions. Thank you, I said quietly. You won, she replied. I wasn't competing, I said. Anna smiled, a look of deep understanding in her eyes. I know. You were just defending your boundaries. She turned and walked away, the sound of her high heels clicking against the pavement fading into the distance. Director Evans offered to send a driver to take me home, but I declined. I wanted to walk alone. Standing on the courthouse steps, watching the bustling crowd below, I thought about how everyone carried their own stories, unaware of the war between truth and lies, hurt and redemption that had just unfolded inside. I took another deep breath, savoring the taste of freedom, clean, pure, almost enough to bring tears to my eyes. The sun filtered through the clouds, casting dappled shadows on the ground, much like my life, dark moments but ultimately illuminated by light. The road to recovery was long and arduous. The wound in my right shoulder ached constantly on rainy days, and every lift of my arm or twist of my torso sent a sharp, tearing pain through my body. The doctor warned that nerve damage recovery would take patience, possibly a year, 2 years, or even longer. But I never considered giving up, just as I had never surrendered to that twisted family. Every morning, I arrived at the rehabilitation center promptly, working through stretching exercises under the therapist's guidance. Sweat soaked my clothes and pain beads dotted my forehead, but I gritted my teeth and pushed past my limits time and time again. My colleague Lena would stop by after work, bringing me a bouquet of fresh sunflowers. Phoebe, she'd say, you're just like these sunflowers, always turning toward the light. I knew true recovery wasn't just physical but emotional. Once I'd cared too much about others' opinions, desperately trying to please a family that didn't love me, only to be hurt repeatedly. Now I was learning to make peace with myself, to embrace the scars of the past. On weekends, I'd run in the park, feeling the wind on my face. Late at night, I'd read a good book, letting the words suit the cracks in my heart. I'd dine and watch movies with my team, savoring the warmth of genuine laughter and companionship. A year later, I stood in a glass-walled briefing room, with the glittering city skyline behind me. The setting sun bathed the room in a warm golden glow. The nameplate on the door read clearly, Phoebe Jensen, head of the secret threat analysis team. It was a position I'd earned through hard work, a testament to my professional abilities. My team gathered around the large display screen, discussing the latest cybersecurity case with focused enthusiasm. They were all industry elites, intelligent, dedicated, and unwavering. We trusted each other, supported each other, forging a bond deeper than blood. These were my chosen family, the people who truly respected and cherished me. At a team dinner, Lena noticed the scar on my shoulder and asked about it gently. I didn't avoid the question, but told the story of that terrible night calmly, as if recounting someone else's experience, no anger, no resentment, just acceptance. After I finished, the table fell silent. Then our team lead patted my shoulder firmly. Phoebe, you're brave. From now on, we're your family. We'll always have your back. In that moment, my eyes filled with tears. The warmth and support I'd never received from my biological family, I'd found in this group of colleagues bound by shared purpose. The scar on my right shoulder was still visible, a faint reminder of the past. It ached on rainy days, but it no longer brought pain. It was a reminder of where I'd been, how strong I was, and the importance of never compromising on truth or losing myself to please others. I heard about Mark through a distant relative. He'd been behaving well in prison, participating actively in labor reform and counseling sessions. He'd even enrolled in a college equivalency program, hoping to make up for the wasted years. The relative said Mark had written in a letter, finally realizing that my mother's favoritism hadn't been love, but poison that had destroyed him and hurt me. He planned to find an honest job after his release, live a quiet life, and someday apologize to me properly. I smiled faintly when I heard this. An apology no longer mattered. His life was his to live, and mine had turned to a new chapter long ago. As for my mother, she tried to contact me several times after the trial. First she called, but I blocked her number. Then she sent packages, my favorite snacks from childhood, a few articles of clothing, but I had the courier return them unopened. 6 months ago, Gary sent me a text message, saying my mother had developed severe depression, locking herself in her room all day, muttering, "I'm sorry, Phoebe," and I ruined Mark. He begged me to visit her, even just for a moment, from a distance. I hesitated for a long time, but ultimately refused. It wasn't cruelty, I knew the rift between us was irreparable. My mother's depression stemmed from the false family she'd built and the toxic favoritism she'd fostered. A single visit from me wouldn't heal that. I couldn't let her guilt drag me back into that suffocating environment. I replied to Gary, "Take care of her. Please don't contact me again. The best outcome for all of us is to go our separate ways in peace." They never reached out again. Occasionally, I'd hear updates from relatives. My mother's condition had improved slightly, and she'd started going for walks. Gary had retired, and the two of them spent their days gardening, leading a quiet life. I truly hoped they'd find redemption in their later years, learning to reflect on their mistakes and live in peace. One morning, I received a strange email in my work inbox, sent by the prison's counselor. Attached was a letter from Mark. His handwriting was neat and careful, a stark contrast to his past recklessness. He wrote about the 2 years he'd spent in prison, how he'd thought long and hard about his stupidity and selfishness. He acknowledged that no amount of apologies could undo the harm he'd caused. He didn't ask for my forgiveness, only that I find happiness. He mentioned earning an associate's degree in computer science through the prison's education program, and his hope to find a steady job after release, to make amends for his past mistakes. I read the letter, then saved it in a folder on my computer without replying. It wasn't that I couldn't forgive, it was that I didn't need to. His confession was for his own peace of mind, not mine. My pain and growth no longer depended on his remorse. I only hoped he'd continue to reform during his remaining sentence, and emerge as a decent, respectful human being. Today, I am no longer the timid little girl who begged for approval from a family that didn't love her. I've learned to love myself, to say no, to take responsibility for my own life. I no longer crave validation from my blood relatives, nor do I dwell on the grievances of the past. I understand that true happiness isn't about living up to others' expectations, it's about having the courage to be yourself.